Hello and welcome everybody back to Bread Theory. I'm your host, Zach, and tonight we're going to be covering part two of the political spectrum. Last time we started with monarchy. We made it all the way through monarchy and all the way through oligarchy. And we're going to continue our journey leftward on the spectrum with tonight. We will be starting with a representative democracy. Once again, we're not going to be doing the chat overlay. I'll have to be following your chat myself, and if I see comments that I find relevant to the discussion, I will highlight them. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and share it a couple places before we really get into things, so that way other people have a chance to see what's happening. So just 1 second. Got a few places more to put it up at. I think that's just about it. A couple more places, and I think we'll be done. And then we'll really get into it. But as always, questions are more than welcome, as long as they're in good faith. Only bad question is one that's not asked in good faith. And this is designed to be an introductory series for the political spectrum. It's meant to be accessible to everybody. So don't feel bad if this is all new information to you. Happy to help. This is supposed to be an educational resource. All right, well, let's get into it. So, part 4, the struggle for representative democracy. Representative democracy defined. Democracy, and we have a hyperlink there. Let's see if it does not open there, but further reading on the term democracy. A combination of two Greek words, demos, a citizen of a city-state, and kratos, meaning power or rule. So together we have rule of the citizens. Representative, the people consent to have a politician enact their will in government. There is a video, which I'm not going to play. I'm not going to go on any of the links. This will be up to you to explore on your own. I do now have this entire presentation up in the files of Left Signal Boost, which is the main Facebook group that I run. So if you head over to Left Signal Boost on Facebook, you'll be able to find this entire presentation in case you actually want to check out any of the hyperlinks or embedded videos that I've included. So this is just an overview of what a representative democracy means. On the right side there's a United States House of Representatives divided by states. So you can see various number of representatives that each state has. It is the most democratic federal body that we have, much more so than the Senate, much more so than the executive or judicial branches. We don't even vote for the judicial branch not figureheads, but the heads of the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. All right, American Representative Democracy recap. So this is a video link to just a history of voting rights in America, as we discussed last time in oligarchy. At the beginning of the country, not many people could vote. It was basically just white land-owning men and nobody else. And then just by small degrees here and there, more and more people were enfranchised. So, as discussed in part 3, at the dawn of American representative democracy, only white landowning men could vote, which was not very democratic. I don't know. I don't know what's happening here. Decided to double my screen for some reason. I don't know what was going on there. No. Yeah, it's for some reason it's deciding to present on multiple screens, but I don't need that right now. Anyway, poor white men gained voting rights from 1820 to 1856. It took a civil war to even count non-white people as citizens. It took a tremendous struggle from the women's suffrage movement to win the vote for women in 1920. 1965 Voting Rights Act finally removed the last barriers to voting for Black people. Eliminated poll taxes. I'm pretty sure eliminated poll taxes and a test that you would have to pass to vote. 1982, Congress removed barriers for disabled people to vote. So before that point, if you were not able to make it to the polls, if you were not independently mobile, or if it was a struggle for whatever reason, you were kind of out of luck until that the barrier was finally removed in 1982. And moving on, greater democratic control of government. As more people are able to vote, they tend to vote for politicians that uphold their interests. This leads to more social programs for the poor, a social safety net, if you will. And remember, this is all in theory. It doesn't always happen this way in practice, but this is what a representative democracy is supposed to function like. According to the people that promote it, this safety net means failure isn't as catastrophic. There is the ability to recover after losing a job or getting scammed or robbed or a business failure. People that start out in poor families have more opportunities to succeed because of this. More successful people leads to more democratic control because they are able to participate in the democratic process more. Checking back in with the spectrum, in orange we have a representative democracy with a mostly capitalist economy. So here we are, orange spectrum right there. That's representative democracy. So this would be if money had little to no influence in election results. You couldn't buy politicians with campaign donations or lobbyists, well, that sort of thing. This would be representative democracy in its more pure form. But notice that capitalism does continue on even past that point, and we will see more about that in the next section. You may have also noticed that for the first time on the spectrum, we have an overarching or umbrella category, democracy, and a subcategory, representative democracy. And that's because the rest of the spectrum we will be looking at is different forms of democracy. It's important to show both how, excuse me, how they're all linked and how they operate in different ways. Also, Americans sometimes get confused about if we have a democracy or not because they hear it called a representative republic or just a republic. But a representative republic is a form of democracy, representative democracy. And there's a hyperlink there for more reading on that. If I can at least pull up. Nope, that doesn't help at all. I need to get. I realize now that my camera is in the way, so I'm going to change the scene just a little bit so you can see all the words on the screen. Moving on. So features of representative democracy include voters choose. Through voting, citizens choose between two or more candidates which one is most closely aligned to their political beliefs. Elections are free, fair, and open to anyone that wants to run. Elections happen at regular intervals. The philosophy, one person, one vote. Hyperlink there for more information on that. Means every citizen gets an equal say in how the government is run. No one should be able to use money or other power to influence the government or elections more than anyone else. Equal representation is the idea. More features of representative democracy. Representative duties. Representatives are supposed to represent or represent the views of those that elected them as closely as possible. So you send someone to Congress, whether that's state Congress or the federal Congress, they should do what they say and do what they said they were going to do in order for you to vote for them. The idea is to carry your opinion, to represent your opinion as closely as possible, realizing that it's impossible to represent the opinions of all of the constituents that voted for them. But as closely as possible is supposed to be the goal. Representatives should care about the issues facing the citizens whose votes they want. Every representative should represent roughly the same number of citizens, so power is distributed evenly across the nation. And again, in the House of Representatives, that's much more the case. It's much more closely that each representative represents the same number of people. In the Senate, there's wide disparities in that. The senators from Wyoming, for example, represent, I think, something like 500,000 people. So each of them represents, I mean, if you were to divide that in half, that's 250,000 people for every one senator. And on the other end, you have California. Let's look at, they just shifted recently. Let's see how many representatives they have. All right, so they have 52 representatives. And then if you divide that by California's population, take a look. Let's see here now. Population 39 million. So let's do some quick calculations on that. So we have 39 million. How close to 40 million are they? Yeah, 39.5 million. So yeah, we'll just say 39 million for ease of example. And divide that amongst just two senators. So divide in half. Each of those senators, you have 19.5 million people represented for each of those senators. Yeah, I don't know why I saw how many representatives they have. That's not what I was talking about. But yeah, so each of those senators represents 19.5 million people, or 19.5 million people per senator in the state of California. And then let's look up the actual population of Wyoming. 587,000. So 587,000 divided by 2 senators, only 293,500 people per senator for that state. So the closer that is to 1, the more power your particular senator has. Like imagine if you had a state with 2 people and you had 2 representatives, they would represent themselves, I guess. They would have tremendous power compared to someone who has to represent 19 million people. And yeah, so under representative government, the ideal is to have things evenly represented, people evenly represented. Again, trying to get as close to 1 person, 1 vote as is practicable. Representatives should do what the citizens want first, not what a business or another special interest want. A little sidetrack on special interest there, if you care to follow it. Actually, I bet that would be a way that I could also share the links in the chat. I don't know why I didn't think of that before, but I certainly could. Copy link address and share it in the chat. And that way you all can follow along too. If they don't do what's best in the best interest of their voters, they may face losing the next election. Excuse me. Features of representative democracy: separation of powers. So again, I'll save that link and put it in the chat. Oop, not what I meant to do there. Copy link address. Paste that and put that in the chat. Democracies tend to separate the roles of government into 3 branches of legislative, judicial, and executive. This is just the common form of things. Some do it more than others. Some are going to give the executive branch more or less power. This is done in theory to keep any one of the branches from becoming too powerful. In the US, each branch has checks on the other branches' power. These are called checks and balances. So, for example, the president can veto a bill that Congress approves, even if both the Senate and the House of Representatives agree on a bill and pass it. The president can say nope and veto it. But then Congress has a check on that power. If they get a 2/3 majority to repass the very same bill, they can get it through despite the president's veto. We also have things like the Supreme Court can do judicial review to ensure that laws that are passed hold up to the Constitution and are constitutional, that sort of thing. So checks on each branch of power from each other branch. Features of representative democracy: freedom from control by powerful interests. Separation of church and state is a big one. In the US, we have the Establishment Clause. I'm going to go ahead and copy that link for you. Put that in the chat as well. In the Constitution, prohibiting the government from establishing a religion or basing laws on religious doctrine. For example, a school cannot mandate a school prayer, but must allow students to pray on their own time. This also prevents religious discrimination and exempts religious institutions from taxation. Or at least that's the rationale for it. So yeah, we have they describe it as a wall between church and state, or the government and religions. Features of representative democracy: freedom from control of powerful interests by powerful interests. Continued. So now rather than the powerful interest being religion, we're looking at business being the powerful interest, that we are supposed to be protected from their influence. I will go ahead and share. Copy that. Put the slideshow back up. Share the link to that video in the chat. Well, that's a really good one. That's about Citizens United. And that was a landmark case that very much opened up the floodgates for money in American politics. So ideally, large corporations are not able to buy politicians through large campaign donations, extravagant gifts, and paid lobbyists. This has not always worked out in practice. Citizens United opened up the floodgates for business campaign contributions. There's a lot of ways you can get around the limits to individual contributions with PACs and super PACs and all sorts of things. As long as you can prove that you're not colluding with the campaign or not coordinating directly, and what's the standard for that? I don't know that it's really been tested all that much, except for in Citizens United. But since then, I don't know how much it's been tested. You're pretty much free to do what you please as a large business. So lobbying is also a very lucrative profession. People will say that lobbying is protected by freedom of speech. And lobbyists can do a lot of things that an ordinary person cannot do to funnel money to that person's campaign. So yeah. So it doesn't always work out in practice, but in theory, we're supposed to be insulated from big money interests, because that kind of flies in the face of a democracy of any kind. If you can just flood a campaign with money and put your thumb on the scale in terms of what the results are going to be. And it's also pretty telling that money spent on campaigns has gone up considerably since the time of Citizens United. You have to ask yourself why there's so much money spent on advertising and campaigns if it's not effective to do so. And the idea then is, if you spend money on a politician's campaign, they will see that you spent that money, or they will be informed one way or another that it was you who spent that money, and they will do you favors in kind. Or you just are pushing people that are going to be more favorable to you from the start. They're generally business friendly to whatever business that you are running, and manage to force them through on a more regular basis than if there was no money in the campaign. So it's not directly influencing them, but it is directly influencing the outcome of legal policy and laws. Another feature of representative democracy is the social safety net. As mentioned before, with greater working class control, more social programs are created to take care of people's needs. People tend to vote for politicians that are going to take care of them. And if that is the only influence on the election, then just as a matter of course, there's going to end up being more social programs to help people. Programs like universal health care. I'll save the link for that. Put that over in the chat. Universal College is another one that you can go and check out a link for. And then universal housing, another important one. To go and take a look at. So anyway, they're often pursued to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those words come from the American Declaration of Independence, that we are entitled to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, once it transferred to the Constitution, the actual binding legal document, instead of pursuit of happiness, the word property was substituted, and that has had an effect. Not guaranteed the right to pursue your happiness. But these sorts of programs could help you in that endeavor. Like if you could go to college to get your degree, but you are you're in poor health and you can't afford healthcare coverage, or you just can't afford college itself, these sorts of programs could help you do that. Also, it's kind of hard to have a guarantee to your life or your freedom if you are out on the street. So that's where something like a universal housing program might come in and make sure to preserve that so that you are able to pursue happiness and able to have a guarantee to life and liberty. Other programs like protections for unions, SNAP, which is supplemental nutrition aid, and I can never remember the last part of the acronym. Let's look it up. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So that's what SNAP is. Raising the minimum wage, Social Security. These things help people stay out of poverty. And there's a link to a study that demonstrates that. We'll copy the address into the chat so that you have it too. Social safety nets allow people to organize unions and go on strike for better conditions and pay at work because they don't have to fear catastrophe if they lose their job or temporarily lose income while on strike. So if you desperately need a job, it is really hard to organize because you are depending on that literally for your survival. So risking losing income is a big deal. It wouldn't be, though, if there were guaranteed social programs for people. So class divisions begin to blur. The more power that the working class gains from democracy, the more class divisions start to break down. It's not just a transfer of wealth, although that is part of what power is, especially in America, but it's also a transfer of power in general, from having a separate or a mostly separate ruling class to having one that's more permeable, one that you can be a part of because you have a more stable platform to push off of and rise up through the ranks. Social safety nets raise the floor of the working class, making it harder to fall past a certain point and giving more people opportunities for success. And then people often talk about the Scandinavian model. We're going to copy that link address in here and paste, especially after World War II. That would be a good example of that. They had very robust social programs, very high unionization rates. So one of the best examples of a more purely functioning representative democracy would be Scandinavian countries, especially after World War II when they were at their strongest. That power has eroded a little bit over time, and there is a lot more business influence today in those countries, but still they're a pretty good example for a good working representative democracy. And because remember, these Scandinavian countries still use capitalism as their main economic form. So to call them socialist states is inaccurate in my estimation. Rights continue to shift. Individual rights for those at the top continue to erode as they are less able to use money to maintain their power. You can't control things as much if you have more money in a representative democracy. More people have control. Power is spread out much more, just as a matter of course. Collective rights grow tremendously over time. We'll put the link for that in the chat. As the working class gains power and stability, as the US Constitution, here's a link to the Constitution, gains more amendments, it tends to extend more rights for more people. So you can look at the why would I be reloading this page? Getting an error message, sorry. Anyway, moving on. So looking at the Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and there's a lot of freedom guaranteed in that. But remember that it was only for white men at the time, for the most part, and they were extended to other people over time. But still, we have things like, let's see. Well, 13th Amendment is a big one in ending slavery, ending involuntary servitude, except as a form of punishment for a crime. So there are still states where slavery is allowed for prisoners, and that's not an overstatement. It is literal slavery. You can force prisoners to work for little to no money against their will. That's not all states. A lot of states have done away with that, but it is some. Let's see then. Guarantee is the 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to natural born and naturalized people. Now that's being assaulted right now by our current administration. The idea of birthright citizenship, and gives equal protection under the law to all. And that's a really big one. Equal protection. You can't favor people with the law just based on arbitrary characteristics. Let's see, 15th Amendment says the vote cannot be denied by race. So we're seeing that people are getting more and more rights, collective rights, as things go on, and also individual rights for average people. Yep, that's income tax. Then we got prohibition. We have women getting the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. Let's see. Washington, D.C. is given 3 electoral votes in the 23rd Amendment. So at least for presidential elections, they have some representation. You know, as we mentioned in the last episode, Washington, D.C. does not have any voting representatives in Congress. No senators, no representatives at all. But at least they do have those 3 electoral votes. Let's see. So the 24th was another big one, banning the use of poll taxes. That was a big barrier where they would say, well, you know, anyone can vote. It's not prejudicial. It's just you have to have the money to do so. So people that had very little money ended up not getting any representation. And they decided that was illegal. You couldn't justify it by saying that we need to fund our elections one way or another. It was too important of a right to have any barriers to it. So then the right to vote was changed from 21 to 18. So that's more people who are represented then. All people who are in the majority or in who are no longer minors, people that are adults, are allowed to vote by that one. And the last one just about congressional pay raises have to be set after the next election. So, but overall, we can see a lot of rights that are afforded to people over time. Anyway, did we cover that whole last one? Yeah, we said it gets more rights to more people. Mm-hmm. All right, to sum up here, we have some pros and cons of representative democracy. The pros being decisions are made in the interest of the majority. There's majority rule. More opportunities for average people to participate in government. More rights and protections for citizens than in the previous forms of government that we've taken a look at. Social programs keep people out of poverty. Social and economic mobility. Representatives held to account for their decisions. They're voted out if they don't enact the will of the people. Bad politicians can be excluded. And that's something that is a problem also for later forms that we'll be looking at. That it's not always easy to exclude bad politicians, but here's a system that certainly can. More streamlined process than a direct democracy. There's less people that have to make a decision, so decisions tend to happen more rapidly. Cons: slower decision making than an oligarchy or monarchy. You can't just have a small group or one monarch make decisions and then just have that be the law or the course of action for the country. It takes deliberation, it takes negotiation to get legislation passed. Less rights and protections for private business. So with money out of politics in an actual representative democracy, there's less ability for private business to influence the course of government. Elections can become popularity contests. That's a common rebuttal to people that are all for representative democracy. Is, oh, it's a popularity contest. Who can fool the masses more completely and more effectively. Social programs do cost money. They're not free. So in an oligarchy where you don't have many social programs, it certainly saves the government money. But yeah, if it is worth that savings or that efficiency, that is another question. There's potential for corruption of elected officials. So even though we're talking more about an idealized form of representative democracy, there's always that potential for corruption. There's people that have their hands on the levers of power, and people that represent a lot of people. That's a concentration of power. And anytime you have a concentration of power, it is possible to corrupt that concentration. Progress can be undone by future political majorities. So you spend a lot of time protecting the rights of a certain people, and it can just be reversed. The next administration that gets into office, the next Congress that comes to power, they can just reverse it all. It is perceived as less stable than oligarchy and monarchy. Now, whether or not that's the case, that there's definitely a lot of debate about that. There's plenty of monarchies that would war constantly with each other. There would be plots within the court to murder the monarchs to gain power, or game the line of succession. So the idea that monarchy is inherently more stable, and the same thing with oligarchy too. If people are making decisions only in their own narrow interests, eventually that can come to bite them as well. They're not. You could take, for example, climate change. Just because you are making tons of money disregarding the warnings of climate change doesn't mean that it won't affect you at some point too, if for no other reason that people will be in desperate situations because of climate change and they may revolt against you. So the idea that oligarchy is more stable is questionable as well. All right, and then we go down to this Pew Research poll that routinely gathers people's backing for various forms of government, and we find that 75%, unsurprisingly, 75%, a very solid majority of Americans support representative democracy. They think it's a good system. I would imagine you're going to find that in a lot of countries. A lot of countries, people are going to like the form of government they have. If for no other reason, then it's what they've always known, and considering anything else might be scary. All right, so there's a link to that Pew Research poll if you're interested in looking into that more, and that also includes the other opinions that we did that we were looking at the end of the monarchy and oligarchy sections. All right, getting into an interesting part of the spectrum now. What happens when people want to do away with separate classes altogether? So remember, we've seen that it's down to two classes with representative democracy: the owner class and the working class. But what if people want to do away with class separations altogether? What do you call that? That's our next stop. More on that next time in part 5, which will be starting right now. Bonus question for the section: what other pros and cons or cons do you see to representative democracy? So there's a little hint about what's coming next. I think there is, in fact, a link to that. I'll get that link put in the chat. Just a minute. I'm going to have to go back into the slideshow so it's full screen again. Anyway, that painting, here's a link to it. You can read more about it. All right, part 5, democratic socialism and revolution. This here too, I don't think I have a hyperlink to this one. It was hard to find information about it, but here is a poster in support of the Soviet Union from, I believe, early on in the Soviet Union. So you can get a sense of where we're going. Setting the standard for socialist revolution. I'll put that hyperlink in the chat as well. It was a chilly day in late October in Russia in 1917, with the events of the first revolution of the year, which overthrew the Tsar fresh in the minds of the Russian people. Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik party began another revolution, this time against the provisional government that had come to power after the Tsar's toppling. Spurred on by the public's dislike for the provisional government, for their brutal repression of protests, their bad economy, and continued unpopular involvement in World War I, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace, which was the former Tsar's palace and current capital building of the provisional government, and seized it, kicking off a bloody civil war that lasted until 1923, with the emergence of the now victorious new USSR, or United Soviet Socialist Republic. That's what USSR stands for. They had no way of knowing it at the time, but this revolution would inspire many more to come in the 20th century and change the course of all the world's great powers from then on. Gosh, there's a way to, I think I'm going to see if I can get my name tag off of that window, because I'd like you to be able to see all the words on everything. But I think maybe that now that I've already started, there's maybe not a way to do that. So I'm sorry that some of the words are blocked by my name on the frame, but just listen along and you'll get them all. And this painting on the right here, I don't have a link to it, but this is also one of several paintings that depict the storming of the Winter Palace by the Bolsheviks. Goals of socialist revolution. The economic philosophy they were trying to enact was socialism, which is why they called their new country the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. They believed in a concept popularized by Karl Marx, seen on the left there, called dialectical materialism. And here's a link to more reading on that. That's an interesting concept. And dialectical materialism is the theory that most of conflict in any society comes from the owner class and the working class having opposite and competing interests. More on dialectical materialism. If you worked at, say, a Burger King, you wouldn't want to do any more work than you had to, and you would want to get paid as much as possible, right? You wouldn't volunteer to stay late and clean out the deep fryer for no extra money, right? Your boss, on the other hand, would want the opposite. The less that they pay you and the more work that they can get out of you, the more money they can save for their business. So this is assuming that the boss is the business owner in this case. I'm using that term interchangeably here. They know they have to keep you just happy enough that you don't go work for McDonald's across the street. But any extra money they give you beyond that is less money that they can take home for themselves. It cuts into their profit. That constant conflict causes all the major problems in society, according to dialectical materialism. So there's competing and opposite class interests between whoever the ruling class is. And it doesn't have to be the owner class. It could be the oligarchy. It could be the monarchy. It just has to be whoever is the person who makes decisions about where any sort of a profit from any venture goes. And then the working class, and that could be the working class, the peasant class, the slave class, even. Opposite and competing interests is the idea. The means of production. Because they believed in this philosophy of endless class conflict, the Bolsheviks wanted to create a society without separate classes. They decided capitalism would always produce two classes in conflict with each other, and that socialism would end this division. Socialism is when the workers control the means of production, either indirectly through democratic control of the government or directly through worker-owned and managed cooperatives. So in those two examples, we would have something like the state controlling everything, but then the people having democratic control over that state, right? So the state would be accountable to the people. The state would be the administrator and the owner of everything, and the people would democratically control the state. And then the other example, the worker-owned cooperative, would just be any sort of business where instead of a top-down sort of dictatorial structure where you have an owner sitting at the top making all the decisions and the owners having, or the workers having to obey or lose their job, you would instead have democratic control over the business. The means of production, here comes the link for that one. Also called private property are any equipment, buildings, intellectual property, including patents and copyrighted materials, and land used to make things or provide services in exchange for money. Basically, any property that is used to generate income. That is what private property means in this context. That is the means of production. So features of democratic socialism, one-party rule. So what kind of government did the Bolsheviks want? According to Lenin in his book, The State and Revolution, here comes the link for that one. I think that's just the Wikipedia page on the subject. Not that different from a representative republic. Lenin envisioned having representative government, but there would be a few key differences. One key difference would be that instead of two or more parties vying for power all the time, one party, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, would dominate. He felt that having multiple parties gave people only the illusion of choice, since they all served the capitalist system. He also believed that with multiple parties, any progress made from the working class could be undone by another party when they took power, as inevitably tends to happen with multi-party systems. So he thought it would be better just to have one party all working in one direction for the aim of whatever the people wanted, because the people would control it democratically. More features of democratic socialism: limited power of representatives. To limit the power of representatives, their ability to raise too much money for a campaign and distort the results. Democratic socialist countries tend to limit campaign contributions. Here's an example of that in this link I'll give to you. To individuals, or require all campaigns to be publicly funded. That is, that all campaigns would get the same amount of money for each person who's running for a position. Politicians are often paid very modestly in relation to their position. Lenin put it as receiving a working man's wages, the idea being that people should run for office if they want to do the work, and not if they just want to get rich. Politicians who do not hold to their campaign promises could be recalled at any time by their constituency. This, according to Lenin. Features of democratic socialism, central planning. On a link for that one. Government manages all businesses or nationalizes key industries. Here's a little tutorial on what it means to nationalize a business in this link that I'll share with you. Sorry, it's a lot of links that I've put in here, but I wanted to make this the presentation where you could speed it up or slow it down kind of at will. So my idea is I mean, this is the presentation that I've been showing to my students. And some sections of my class tend to get through material much more quickly than others. So by having all these hyperlinks, that is one way that I can slow things down. It's kind of a throttle on how fast things go. But then also, if I were to assign this for independent study, it's, something that it's a lot more branches that a student could explore on their own to get more context than can be fit into one small presentation. Even though this is a relatively large presentation when all is said and done. Anyway, government manages all businesses or nationalizes key industries like healthcare, energy generation, and agriculture, things that are vital to the functioning of an economy or a nation. And agriculture strictly regulates any businesses that they don't manage. So they might allow some private enterprise, but those private enterprises must be strictly regulated. This, in theory, we'll take a look at the theory. We'll take a look at the link to the theory, that is. Add that to the links. Eliminates waste from competition and advertising. So if you think about it, if the government is just administering things centrally, you don't have to have advertisements for 20 different brands of gum. There would just be a few brands of gum that are all basically on the same playing field, and equally available to the people. You don't have to have all the different competition between one industry and another because they're all part of the same organization, the centralized planned economy. Industries can be more quickly shifted and adapted to changing circumstances. So if a particular industry becomes obsolete, say we're moving from horse and buggy to car transportation, instead of the old, horse and buggy companies furiously competing to stay relevant, the government could just make the decision to shutter the old-fashioned business or readapt it to a more suitable use in the present. So there's efficiency in that as well. Resources are more efficiently and equitably managed and distributed where they are needed. So again, this depends on government being controlled by the people themselves democratically for that to work well. But it can also work in theory if the people have limited control. Features of democratic socialism: control of information. Critics are quick to point out that speech tends to be much more limited. We'll give you a link to that one as well. In democratic socialist countries, proponents argue that people are susceptible to propaganda and advertising. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry after all. So there's a lot less advertising. People that take trips to places like Cuba will tell you that there's just not that much advertising or any advertising. And it's kind of striking as an American wandering around and not seeing billboards and ads in your face all over the place, because there's just no need for it. Everything is managed by the government to some extent, and they prohibit, advertising to be out of control from the few private businesses that they allow. They say that because of this, the speech of those trying to disrupt or destroy the progress of society must be curtailed. So they argue that censorship is necessary in order to stop the efforts of people that are trying to destroy the society that you are creating, who want to bring it back to a monarchy or an oligarchy or any other form. And for that reason, they have to stop them. Just as in our current society, if people were trying to enslave others, as still happens, we stop that from happening. We don't, we don't allow them to continue promoting their sort of business because it goes against the sort of businesses that we allow in the society. So the same would be true under democratic socialism. Critics will argue that this silences legitimate criticism of the government and its programs and prevents the press from doing honest reporting on things. The goal of the Bolsheviks was to create a society that would be here in orange, so this band in orange here, on the spectrum, one with a democratic socialist government. So that would be, again, a form of representative democracy, but a centralized government that takes over all of production, or at least manages all of production. So it's democratic socialist government and a socialist economy, which would be communism. We could call that communism. And you can get into the weeds about, is it true communism? Because communism has also been described as a classless, stateless, moneyless society, and that would be way beyond what this band can represent. So there are some who would say, no, this is not quite communism. It is only transitionary socialism with the goal of communism later on. But I think for our purposes, it's easiest to think about this banned as communism. It is elimination of the special owner class and the people owning the means of production and democratically controlling the government that distributes everything. So anyway, did they succeed? That's the big question. By most accounts, the USSR did not reach communism. I'll give you the address to one of those accounts. I believe this is a link to Richard Wolff, who is a renowned economist and political thinker. And he talks about how the USSR did not, in fact, quite make it to communism. One of the reasons for that was that Lenin died shortly after the revolution in 1924. So remember, the revolution, the war for revolution, a revolutionary war, I should say, went on until 1923. So just a year later, Lenin dies. Joseph Stalin and the leaders of the USSR after him were less interested in giving control of the means of production over to the people themselves than they were with preserving their own positions in their own power positions and defending the USSR from its enemies in the West. So that was, they would use that as an excuse to hold on to power. They say we're being attacked by Western forces, so we need to stay in power in order to remain strong and fight back all of our enemies who are trying to crush us. And they had good reason for thinking that. Shortly after the formation of the USSR, the Western powers invaded and tried to topple the new regime, the USSR, and they had to fight them off. So there is reason for them to believe that they had to keep power in order to maintain the country and all the gains that they had. At the same time, by most accounts, they did not go much further down the road towards giving the people control of the means of production and reaching some form of communism. Instead, what they achieved is, in my opinion, and not everyone's opinion, but I think it is best described as state capitalism. I'll give you the address or the link address for that one. As we have seen with private capitalism, there are two basic classes, the owner class and the working class. There is some chance of moving from one class to the other, but no guarantees. In state capitalism, the state, which is the government, this is what we mean by the state in this context, is the government takes the role of owner and directs the economy centrally. So it's taking over the former role of the private capitalist class. Sometimes private enterprise is also allowed, but essentials like energy, food, and other resources are kept nationalized. That tends to be the case across all of the countries that call themselves any version of socialist or communist, even to this day. The main vital resources are nationalized. There is some allowance for private enterprise, but it's usually very small. I think in the case of Cuba, you can have like a family-owned business with some independence, but you're still heavily regulated by the state itself. So this band in orange is where state capitalism fits in. So we're still in capitalism, but we have more of a democratic socialist government. So it's still structured much in the same way that Lenin was talking about. We have representative we have representative democracy, or at least the appearance of it, and a centralized government-run economy. But it's still functions like capitalism in that the state becomes the new capitalist owner. Have any countries reached communism? Why or why not? And again, in short, no. Many countries, including China, Vietnam, and Cuba, have successfully overthrown previous governments with the aim of instituting communism. But though no revolution has been exactly the same as any other, all have more or less followed the model of the former USSR and implemented a sort of state capitalism to one degree or another. This is much how China functions today. Again, it depends on how much you believe that people actually have control over the government. So by their own estimation, there's a lot of representation. In fact, their version of Congress has many, many more representatives. Of course, they're a much larger country population-wise than the U.S., but they have, I believe, thousands of representatives. And according to them, the people do have power over those representatives. Hard to say how much that is actually true or not, because unfortunately, it is hard to get accurate information about any country that the U.S. has an antagonistic relationship with in the world. A lot of what's available to people in America is going to be tainted by how the government wants you to view that country, especially if they are a trade rival like China. So it's hard to get accurate information. So you could believe that yes, they have achieved a high degree of democracy, and the people more or less have control over the means of production through their government. Or you could think that it's more or less for show, as often people say that the U.S. democracy is more or less for show, and that the real people in charge are the ones who control and direct the economy. So in the case of the U.S., that would be private business, and in the case of China, would be the government. Well, let's see, lost my place there. Supporters will say that that they are all in a journey towards communism and will give control of the means of production to the people eventually. They will point to reforms that have happened over the years and say that this is pointing towards achieving a true communism. Detractors believe a communist society is impossible because power corrupts people. So as soon as the new regime has it, they will never give it up, and they will always find justifications for staying in power. So you're free to decide that for yourself, how much you believe any of these countries have achieved a kind of communism. Now let's talk about worker-owned cooperatives. There are, however, examples of small-scale businesses which are run as socialist enterprises. In a worker-owned cooperative, as opposed to consumer cooperatives and producer cooperatives, the business structure is flattened. It is democratized. Instead of bosses or owners dictating everything from pay to scheduling to working conditions, vacation, job descriptions, and even who gets leadership positions, the workers themselves decide these things democratically. It's not as though they make every decision democratically. It's not as though if you had, let's think of a simple example, like a grocery store that was managed as a cooperative. It's not as though you would have to vote on which supplier of bananas to use, or, you know, what type of lighting to use in all of the displays. You would delegate those decisions to the workers within the company. But the important things like pay, who's in charge, and stuff like that, the things that affect all the workers, would be voted on by all of the people. So this would be similar to a publicly traded company. So you know that In that case, in say a publicly traded corporation in the United States, one share equals one vote. And in the capitalist arrangement of things, if you had a lot of shares, you would have a lot of votes. So every time that the shareholders meeting took place, you would have a lot more power than people who had less shares than you. And in fact, if you owned over 50% of the shares, you would control that company. You would effectively own it. So different from that, in a worker-owned cooperative, each worker only gets one vote and no non-workers get any votes. So all of the decisions are made by the workers themselves. All of those key decisions, that is. Mondragon, and here's a link to further reading on Mondragon Corporation in Spain is a good example of a worker-owned cooperative. It is a cooperative of cooperatives, in fact. And then Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi is a good local example of a worker-owned cooperative. So here's more information about both of those. So an important note, though, before we move on, is that these companies still operate within capitalist economies and rely on capitalist businesses to trade with. So even though they themselves might be democratically managed, democratically structured, because no company stands alone, they rely on many other companies to do everything they do. They still are participating in capitalism. It's just indirectly rather than directly. And here's a really good video that just gives you the basics of what a structure of a worker-owned cooperative looks like. So if you're still scratching your head about what a worker-owned cooperative is, watch this video that's embedded here. I just put it in the chat, and you can get some good information about that. All right, getting towards the end of this section, democratic socialism, pros and cons. Democratic control of government and the workplace is a pro, as is robust social programs. And you will see this in virtually all of the self-described socialist or communist countries. Robust social programs, often more so than you see in the US. In Cuba, for example, you have a guaranteed right to housing, you have universal health care, and other social programs. You have more fair and equitable distribution of resources and power in society, more people free to pursue their passion rather than merely surviving. Lessening of a boom and bust cycle of the economy. So with the centrally planned economy, you can adjust and plan for natural booms and busts and try to mitigate their impacts. Less money going to useless middlemen in advertising, competition, insurance as well. Dependency on private business owners is eliminated. We're all, unless you are a business owner yourself, we are all dependent on private business owners. Unless you work for the government, you are dependent on a private business owner for your livelihood, for your ability to keep on living. So, in theory, with a democratic socialist country, that dependency is eliminated. And it gets money out of politics. The cons. Entrepreneurs must share control of their business that they create. They don't have absolute control. They're not, little monarchs sitting atop their business empire. They have a lot more need and requirement to share the power with their workers and to be regulated by the government for the benefit of the workers. Democracy in the workplace requires more time devoted to meetings and decision making. So we were talking about the worker-owned cooperatives. If you're making all those decisions democratically, it's not just a boss quickly making snap judgments about what to do in terms of pay or benefits or whatever. It's a lot more conversations and negotiation, like you see in any type of democracy. So that requires a lot more of your time as a worker. So that has to be factored in. Some lazy people may take advantage of those social programs. If there's no threat of having to be out on the street, so the argument goes, people might take advantage. They might just, it's often said that they don't want the people in this country don't want the social safety net to become a hammock, something where you can just lounge and not ever try to get out of, just take advantage of the system. I myself may be a little bit skeptical of that idea, but that is something that you will hear a lot. That is a opinion that people have. Becoming a billionaire would become impossible or virtually impossible. I believe China does have some billionaires, but I think far fewer per capita than the US. Becoming a millionaire would get a lot harder. Higher taxes, especially at the top earning levels. More dependency on government. So there's that trade-off. Instead of being dependent on the private sector, you are dependent on government. And oftentimes greater censorship. And we do see that in a lot of the self-described socialist and communist countries. There's a lot more censorship. For better or worse. Again, they may claim to be protecting you from people that wish to swindle and scam you or destroy the progress that's been made. But that also may catch in its net people that are trying to make things better and just happen to have a different view of things than the official government line allows for. So going back to that Pew Research poll, I'm not going to link that one again because I already have. It's the same poll about Americans' opinions on various types of government. We have 31% of Americans support democratic socialism. The thing is, democratic socialism can mean different things to different people. Some people might consider just the Scandinavian model to be democratic socialism, whether or not it fits the definition or not. So hard to get a super clear pulse on what that actually means, but at least 31% support something that would be called democratic socialism. So whether that means they want the state to just take control of and nationalize the big important industries and manage things centrally, and then allow for some private enterprise, whether they mean they want, a more more than the state just being the taking the place of the old capitalist owners and actually having worker control of the means of production. It's hard to say what people mean by that, but they want something that can be called democratic socialism. And I don't think anyone would call the US now or ever a democratic socialist country, unless they, so there's probably some out there who have very extreme opinions, and any sort of social program they might think of as democratic socialism. But by and large, I don't think Americans would not describe ourselves as a democratic socialist country. So that can give us kind of a bearing of what people mean when they say they would support that system. All right, democratic socialist hierarchies. So at the state capitalist end, We have now government having replaced the old capitalist owner. There's still a permeable barrier between classes, but the business owner has been replaced with the centralized government owner by and large. So, just like it is possible to become an owner in the US, it's tremendously difficult, especially if you don't have resources going into it. But if your family's not already a family of owners, it's very hard to become an owner, but it is possible. You could save up a lot of money, or you could just have a really, really good idea, and somewhere along the line, some investor takes a chance on you. It is possible to become part of the ruling or owner class, but there is a barrier still. It still is a barrier, and so just like that, just like what exists in the U.S. with you being able to become an owner in socialist countries or self-described communist countries, it is also probably a possibility to get into the state party, become a prominent party member, and work your way up into the owner class or the ruling class. But it's still a barrier, and not everyone can fit up there. There's a reason that these shapes are pyramidal. It's because there's only so much room at the top, only so many positions for managing things. Then at the communist end, class divisions have been eliminated, and the working class controls the government and businesses. So there's no more separate ruling class anymore if we're actually getting to communism, and what I would consider a solid definition of communism. The people would control the means of production through their government. They would have meaningful control over their politicians, and their politicians would direct and distribute resources for the benefit of the people as the people see fit. But that gets rid of the entire ruling class. There's no longer a barrier between. Everyone has control of government. There's still, but notice still, there's a little bit of a pyramidal form. There's still going to be some people that end up being a little bit more well off, and a little bit less well off, but not such a difference anymore. Much less difference than in a more hierarchical system. But we've basically come to the end of hierarchy here. So as we talked about at the very beginning of the political spectrum, we would see that as we go from right to left, hierarchies decrease. And now we've come to the very last position where hierarchy is no more. They're basically a flattened society. Still a tiny bit of stratification between the richest and the poorest, but not that big of a difference. So we have just one more stop on our spectrum, but what could it be? So we've looked at representative democracy, democratic socialism. What is the third form of democracy that we could be talking about? I have been putting a lot of links in the chat, so I just want to make sure I haven't overlooked anyone's chat along the way here. Doesn't look like I have, so I'm going to continue on. Some more on that next time. So here's a little hint about the next section that we'll be covering, which we will continue on tonight, because I believe we still have plenty of time. Yeah. Should be able to cover the rest of this in less than 40 minutes. I think we're in a good place. The bonus question for this section: would having democratic control of your current and or future, if you haven't worked in a workplace yet, be worth the extra meetings and responsibilities? Some people, they just want to show up to work, do their job, and go home. Would it be worth it to have more control and potentially more money, more freedom about what you do, more satisfaction? Would all of that be worth it if you had to make a lot more decisions along with other people and have a lot more meetings that you would go to? Why or why not? Are there ways that those meetings, those extra meetings, could be made a little bit more bearable? Could you offer a pizza party every time you have a meeting to discuss or to make important decisions for the company? Something like that. That's the bonus question to ponder. We're going to move on now to part 6, and this is our final part of the spectrum itself. The only part after that will be the conclusions. Part 6, the aspirations of direct democracy. We have now arrived at the left end of the spectrum and have filled in the final governmental type. What does it mean when a society has a direct I think it's meant to say has a direct democracy and socialist economy? There's more than one answer, and we're going to find out. But we're at the last band of the spectrum there, and we filled it in with direct democracy. So this is the furthest left position of democracy of the political spectrum that we are going to consider in this presentation. So even less hierarchy. For some, the prospect of eliminating class divisions in politics and economics is not enough. They fear allowing any hierarchy that they deem as unjustifiable to remain. This would include representative democracy because it puts a lot of power into the hands of representatives, even if they don't get paid well and are prevented from corruption. There's always the potential that they still could be corrupted or could make decisions based not on the best interests of the people that they represent, but themselves. Instead, they want to spread power out. They want to spread power, autonomy, freedom, and ability to choose as evenly as possible. The goal is to remove the division between government and its citizens completely, so that all that want to participate can do so. Ancient Athens. Many scholars will point to ancient Athens. Here's, I believe, just the Wikipedia article on ancient Athens, or ancient Athenian democracy, I believe. For further reading. So they will point to ancient Athens as the earliest example of direct democracy. And indeed, all male citizens had equal votes in all government matters. They had a direct democracy for those few. But there's just one problem with this example. You can probably guess it. It only applied to male citizens who had finished their military training. Women, non-citizens, resident foreigners, and slaves had no say in the workings of the government whatsoever. They had no votes on anything. The most they could do was speak to people that did make those decisions and try to persuade them. But they had no direct control. This meant that only 10 to 20% of Athenians made all political decisions. And that 10 to 20% I took from that Wikipedia article, so you can follow the source there. Only 10 to 20% of Athenians made all political decisions with no checks on their power at all. There's nothing you could do if you were not part of that 10 to 20%. If you didn't like the decisions being made, you have no recourse, really. While those who could vote had more power than under even a representative system, Athens as a whole functioned more like an oligarchy or even an aristocracy, since there was no method of gaining power for those who were excluded. There's no permeable barrier there. So very much like an aristocracy. Also that it is hereditary. It's only the male citizens who have completed their military training. So that kind of separates people out at birth of where they're going to be in terms of the power structure. Defining some terms. There are some current and historical examples of direct democracy, but first it's important to know how a direct democracy functions. There are many forms of direct democracy can take. And it's going to be a lot of links, so it's going to be a little slow going through all of this. But there's a lot of ways that people have thought about organizing a direct democracy. There's libertarian municipalism. This will be the first link that we put out there. There is eco-socialism. There is solar punk. And the link to this one I actually particularly like. It's a very good explanation of what solar punk is and encompasses. There's democratic confederalism. And various, very, very many flavors of anarchism, which most people just would refer to as anarchy, but people that believe in political anarchism call it anarchism, not as much anarchy. One thing they all have in common is all legislative, that is, rule-making decisions, are made by everybody. But it is much like representative democracy. In direct democracies, there's yet another link to put in there. A lot of links for this section. Direct democracies can function much like representative democracies. Committees can be formed from members of the General Assembly to develop specific types of legislation, or to develop rules for the functioning of the assembly itself, or to handle things like the judiciary and executive functions. And these functions will likely need to also be delegated by the General Assembly, or separate elections could also be held for key leadership positions like judges or heads of security forces, stuff like that. What would this look like in practice? So say, for example, that your neighborhood had a lot of potholes and you wanted to do something about it. You would develop a plan to fix those potholes, either on your own or in a committee of the General Assembly. You would develop this plan. Then you would bring your idea to the floor of the assembly for you and all of your fellow citizens to vote on it. If it passes, the plan gets delegated to the appropriate department to fix the problem. So you still would probably have a Department of Public Works if we're talking about the local level. It would be sent to them and say, hey, go fix all these potholes. Here's the money to do it, or the resources to do it. Go ahead and do it. So if it passes, the plan gets delegated to the appropriate department to fix the problem. And that is how government decisions would be made. So very similar to the representative process. It's just that everybody is involved. Challenges of direct democracy include things like scalability. So imagine this picture on the right, an entire baseball stadium. Imagine all of these people having to make a democratic decision. Just recording all the votes would take a long time. There could be 100,000 people in this stadium. The more people involved in a political unit who all vote on every piece of legislation, the more difficult logistically it becomes. Just finding a space large enough for everyone to be physically in the same space becomes cumbersome very quickly and impossible once you get to a population larger than, say, a stadium can accommodate. Like, how would you even do it on a larger scale than this? A mega stadium, like it'd be very difficult. With modern technology, though, larger assemblies with instant secure voting could theoretically be possible. Basically be like one gigantic Zoom meeting. So physically, all those people could be in the same virtual space. But the logistics of conducting such a massive meeting, including giving people time to debate legislation, would be nearly impossible. But perhaps legislation could be introduced asynchronously. You would instead post an online video, and then that would give people a designated amount of time to watch your video and consider it, and then at whatever time they watch the video, up or down vote it, just like you would a YouTube video. Assemblies could be reserved for other purposes. So actually getting together in person would be for other things like ceremonies or whatever other reason you'd have to have a lot of people all together at once. But no matter how you slice it, though, the decisions take longer and are more complex when everybody gets a say. For this reason, direct democracies in practice tend to be no larger than a few thousand people at most. And more commonly, it's even smaller than that. Challenges of direct democracy: expertise. One of the features of representative democracy is decisions are delegated to professional politicians who have a passion for lawmaking, or at least a lot of knowledge of it, and the time and dedication to become experts at it. By contrast, direct democracy requires all citizens to be informed on all of the issues. Not everyone has the time or desire to participate in government at all. Decisions made by mostly non-experts might not be as sound as ones developed by experts. That is a legitimate challenge to direct democracy. You just have random people coming up with ideas that sound good to them. They may be able to present in a palatable way to enough people to get it passed, that in practice are short-sighted or just not good ideas for one reason or another. On the other hand, with more people making decisions, there might be more buy-in for the process and ownership of the results. If it's something you're a part of that you're making decisions on, you're going to feel a lot more connected to the way that it goes. Just having the ability to participate might make a lot more people passionate about participation just because they can. It certainly would eliminate a lot of the cynical arguments for not being involved in government or politics, like that. It doesn't matter what I do or say. It just goes the way that whatever big interest, desires it to go. Well, if everyone is making the decisions instead, that sort of a cynical attitude kind of goes by the wayside, because you can just go and be a part of it. Another challenge to direct democracy: rule by those who show up. Though in theory everyone has time and drive to be informed and participate, in practice many people are busy and or just not interested. Like, no matter how much power you allow them to have, they may just not care to show up. They couldn't think of anything more tedious and unattractive than sitting through a long meeting of people deliberating tedious points about, what sort of curbs to put in on the new street that's going in, or what the gauge of the sewer pipes need to be for new construction over a certain number of stories, or any number of the tedious things that governments deal with all the time. If you've ever been to any sort of a local public meeting of say your city council, it's often a really boring thing, and there's often a lot of really tedious discussion that happens even there. And these are supposedly people that are experts, and it can be, not for the faint of heart. You really have to have some dedication to get through it. So that can be a barrier, or a challenge at least, to a lot of people wanting to participate. The function of government then falls to whoever shows up and does the work. So if most people are just uninterested, you could still get rule by the few, just, de facto, because they're the ones who are willing to show up no matter what. I think anyone who's been involved in a volunteer organization has probably seen this sort of thing. There's often someone who they will show up to every single meeting. They seem to show up just so they can hear themselves talk, and they really enjoy feeling like they have power. So those sorts of people may show up to every single government meeting that they possibly can. However, just because someone has the time and desire to govern does not mean that they are the best person for the job or have the best of intentions for everyone. They could be dumb. They could be really short-sighted, but they could just have a lot of zest for the political process or just really want to feel important. I think anyone who has had any experience directly or indirectly with an HOA, a housing association, probably has some idea of what I'm talking about. A lot of people are on housing association boards just because they like to feel important. They don't have a lot to say. They don't really have much of an agenda in mind. They have the time. Maybe a lot of times they tend to be retired people because they just have the time and the desire to sit around and feel important. So you can get those sorts of people being the ones that actually end up showing up. And also because there are no elections, because with direct democracy, there's no candidates. It's just whoever shows up and makes the decision who is part of the legislative process. But because there are no elections, there's no way to filter out bad politicians. There's no way to get rid of these busybodies who just like to feel important, because they are allowed to vote unless they do something super egregious and your particular community has decided that whatever they've done means they shouldn't have any power to vote anymore. There's no way to get rid of them. They can just keep showing up and they can keep voting and keep having an influence. At the same time, though, there's no way to hold back good politicians. So at the same time that you might have these tedious, boring, self-important people, you might have some really good politicians that otherwise would have no means of becoming part of political decisions in our current configuration under representative democracy. There's also no way to keep them out. So you know, if you've ever looked at any sort of third-party candidate, you've probably found someone who really resonates with your political point of view, whatever that may be, who has little to no chance of ever wielding any sort of political power because they are a fringe, quote unquote, party. So under a direct democracy, they can't be held back either. So all those people that really do care and really do want things to be better for everybody and really do have the community's best interest in mind are all able to wield power as well. There's a give and take. So let's look at some modern examples of direct democracy. So there are no examples, historical or modern, of an entire nation and all of its citizens using direct democracy as their form of government. However, there are a couple of examples of fairly large scale direct democracy autonomous political units or autonomous political zones, depends on what you call it. In both of the cases that we're going to look at, the difficulties of direct democracy are mitigated by a system of democratic confederalism. So on a federal system by contrast, power flows from the top down. So that the federal government has the final say in most matters, but there's some level of autonomy and special powers granted to the lower political units like the state and local governments. But they usually don't have as much power as the federal government for most things. So by contrast, in a confederal system, the opposite is true. The smallest government units, which would often be a village or a neighborhood, it could be even as small as like a block. It could be a single apartment building. There's no absolute smallest unit that a direct democracy could take the form of. But in any case, the smallest government units, often a village or a neighborhood, is governed autonomously using direct democracy. So there's a lot of, they basically have the final say in virtually every decision that they make locally, about all the ways that things run locally. Other local units sign on to this confederation charter. So they you might say, we believe in these particular human rights. We believe that we like to use a socialist form of economy, um, or we believe that we'd like to use a mixed economy. You know, you come up with a sort of charter, which would be akin to like a constitution. But instead of imposing it onto these other units would say, hey, I really like what these guys are doing. Let's sign on to their charter. So they show that they agree on the same basic principles. And then delegations are sent from each local unit to deal with issues that affect the whole confederation. Right? So at the very local level, where the most autonomy resides, everything is direct democracy. But then, because you can't again, because of scalability of direct democracy, things are then used or delegated, use a system of representative democracy to make decisions between larger and larger units of government. And we have a couple of examples here. We have the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, more commonly known as Rojava, at least to Westerners. That's if you've heard of it at all, that's probably what it's been called, is Rojava. But it's a autonomous zone of mostly Kurdish people in northeast Syria. So there's a link to further research on that I will put in the chat. And then the other example we're going to look at, these are not the only examples in the world, but these are two of the largest for sure, and most well known, is the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, also called the EZLN. That is the Spanish configuration of the acronym, the EZLN, also called the Zapatistas. And I will copy the link address for that one for you. So just to get some sense of where these units are and about how big they are, we have the geography of the regions. So we have a Democratic Federation of Rojava. That's another way that it is called. So the Autonomous Administration of Northern and Eastern Syria, aka the Democratic Federation of Rojava, commonly referred to as Rojava, is located in the northeast of Syria and contains about 1.6 million people. So it is separated into its capital. Let's go through it this way. The capital is, I am not going to be able to pronounce that correctly, but I'm going to give it a stab. Kamishlo. Official languages are Kurdish, Arabic, Syriac, and Turkish. Political system is federated semi-direct democracy. So again, that's democratic confederalism. And it is administered as a decentralized federation. And they have a president and a prime minister and the federal council, which would be the democratic and federal version of a Congress. And so you have the different regions within it that each send people to the federal council. And then we have the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, also called the EZLN, or the Zapatistas, which is located in the southwest of Mexico, close. It's right on the Guatemala border, and then the Pacific Ocean is to its southwest. and it covers an area about the size of Massachusetts. You can see that region overlaid with New England, so a little bit bigger than Massachusetts. You could say it's probably about the size of Massachusetts plus maybe Connecticut and Rhode Island put together, but a sizable area, comparable to U.S. states. Population of about 300,000. And that's an estimation. They don't have an official number for that, but that's about as good a number as I could find. And we have a representation of the structure of Rojava's government. And further reading on the subject can be found here. I'm going to give you the link to that one. And then there's a really great video that really covers how Rojava is put together on this embedded video. So I'm going to give you the link to that one as well. Does a really nice job covering that. But basically, here it is. So at the base level, this is the democratic confederalism system in Rojava. At the base level, you have the commune, which can include a whole village from 30 to 400 households in a street of a city. So it's at the very base level, not a lot of people represented, just a few hundred, little over 1,000, depending on how big the particular unit of the commune is. The next level up is the neighborhood, villages, or people's council, comprised of the coordination of boards of 7 to 30 communes. So again, we're looking at representative democracy at this level, but at the very base level, that's where the direct democracy comes in. But moving back to the second level, so it's either in urban or rural areas. So I'm sure that's the difference in numbers there is whether it's urban or rural, 7 to 30 communes. The third level is the district people's council. We saw we did not. We saw the different colors in the people's council. So this could be the whole city and surrounding land, coordination of boards of neighborhoods and villages, councils from the district people's council. Places are reserved for representatives of the organizations which are part of the TEV, DEM, such I don't off the top of my head know what those acronyms stand for. I apologize. But anyway, such as the political parties, social movements, and civil society organizations. And then the highest level is the People's Council of West Kurdistan, made up of representatives of all district councils and the organizations which are part of TEV, DEM. Since 2013, MGRK could only meet canton-wide, but there's a good cooperation between cantons, and cantons are basically their version of states or provinces. But it's like a regional division. And then you also have the commissions. These are various commissions that deal with specific endeavors. You have one for defense, political, economic, civil society, ideology, free society, justice, and a special women's only council. And at all levels, I'm not sure if, oh yes, it does. I will save my comments for the next couple of paragraphs. Most of the work of the people of the communes and people's councils is done through commissions. There's a separate women's council at every level. There are women-only commissions which work together with the general commissions, i.e. the economics commissions. So at every level, there are special spaces that are reserved only for women. And this was, the idea was to enfranchise as many people as possible and have spaces that wouldn't just be dominated by men at every level. The idea is to balance the gender roles. So democratic autonomous administration has legislative council, the executive council, and the municipal councils. Part of the Syrian Democratic Council and the Democratic Federation of Rojava, Northern Syria. There are plans for the MGRK councils of each canton to get 40% of the seats in the parliament or legislative council. So I guess that was the highest scale of government. So this particular diagram was based on the work of Erkan Iboga, or Aiboga, in Revolution in Rojava, Pluto Press. Further reading on Rojava can be found here. I will copy that link into the chat right now. Let's see how we're doing on time. We got 15 minutes left. I think we're doing pretty well. Here's also another video by that same person that I had just shared about the EZLN. I think, or did I? No, I think maybe I already shared those links. So moving on. Yeah, I think I did. All right, moving on to the structure of the EZLN's government. A little bit more flattened, a little bit simpler for the EZLN in Mexico. At the bottom level, there's the People's Assembly, community, place, neighborhood. Don't know who that is. Ejido, colony, or as each population is called. So this is the smallest unit, basically. And they okay. So the next level up is the local autonomous government, which then sends representatives to the regional government, the collective of Zapatistas autonomous governments, who then all send representatives to the assemblies of collective or Zapatistas autonomous governments. Further information can be found here on the Zapatistas. I'll copy that link's address. And then there's a really good video on the Zapatistas as well. I'll copy that URL as well. All right, hierarchy compared. So looking back at the previous section with centralized top-down communist government, there is some economic stratification left, but still no class divisions. Now with this direct democracy system, things are pretty similar, but with even less economic stratification. Power is spread out even more, and that will tend to spread out wealth even more evenly as well, and all of the forms of power. So getting towards the end here of this section, pros and cons of direct democracy. Some of the pros are every citizen gets a say in government, no matter what. Power is spread out evenly, which gives less opportunities for corruption. There's no, there's no king that you can just knock over and become the new king, or put the king that you like in power. It would be pretty hard to take over an entire local government. Not that it's impossible, especially if you have committed people, and if there was like low participation in the direct democracy at the local level, you might be able to get enough people to take it over, but it would be a lot harder. Harder for a small group to dominate a decentralized government. There are few opportunities for hoarding wealth and resources so that things are spread out more evenly. Decisions made satisfy a majority of the citizenry at least, and more representation of minorities. So people that have traditionally had a hard time getting their voice heard in politics are given entry into the political system. Cons: not all citizens have the time and or care to participate in the government. Opulent, wealthy lifestyles are no longer available. If not enough citizens participate, rule by those who show up takes over, and those who show up might have bad intentions. No way to remove bad politicians either. Everyone is allowed to vote at the local level. If you're talking about a confederal system, you still have some representative government, and there might be some way to limit who gets into those roles, but at the local level, there's no way to keep out bad actors. Decisions made by novices may be lower quality than those made by professional politicians. Decision making is slower and requires more negotiation. It's just a slower moving animal altogether. But according to that same Pew Research poll, 65% of Americans support some level of direct democracy. It is a popular idea. Yeah, it kind of makes sense to me that most people would want to have more political say. Whether or not they should, that's where your opinion comes in, though. So we will then move into conclusions. We've come to the end. We've filled in our entire political spectrum now. Everything from monarchy to oligarchy to representative democracy, democratic socialism, and direct democracy. And then on the bottom, slave economy, feudalism, capitalism, and socialism. Bonus question. Do you think that modern technology could make direct democracy possible on a larger scale? Why or why not? So that's your bonus question. Let's get into conclusions. And we have just enough time that I think we can get through this. So here's a recap of the spectrum. I just went over each position for you. And here's all the hierarchies put together. So you can see how things go from very hierarchical, a lot of different divisions of class, to a little bit less. And then finally, we're getting less and less until we go all the way down to direct democracy, where there's very little hierarchy. So depending on how much hierarchy you think is good or natural or whatever your estimation, that can help you kind of decide what part of the political spectrum you think you might fall on. I'm not going to go over them again, but here's all side by side, the pros and cons for each type of government that we talked about. Voila. Now you know about the entire political spectrum. But what's that you say? There are all kinds of political ideologies that you haven't heard about, or that you have heard about, but that we haven't covered. So let's place these all on the spectrum in a political ideology speed run. Go very quick here. I will warn you too that there are systems that we will be covering in this speed run of right-wing ideologies that are offensive to people, and we'll be using the symbols as they are, because I think it's important educationally to know what all the symbols look like. Here we go. Starting with conservatism. I'll do we're going to go one by one. We're going to be placing these ideologies on the spectrum, and we'll have a little summary of what each one is. So traditional values, personal modesty, against social programs in general, intolerance to difference, supportive of capitalism. And this band here, at least in terms of American conservatism, is pretty accurate, I would say, to where people fall. On the other side, liberalism, individual rights, liberty, capitalism, rule of law, and equal opportunity. And I would say that band falls pretty well in the blue here. Centrism considers both sides, likes parts of conservatism and parts of liberalism. And we're talking about the center of American ideologies. So we're putting this all on American ideologies for liberal and conservative. The center would fall right in the middle of those two. Supportive of capitalism as well, though. And they'd be placed right about there. Moving on to progressivism. Social justice, supportive of capitalism, tax the rich, social programs, environmentalism, government regulation, right about there at that left edge of American liberalism. Libertarianism, property rights, very minimal government, personal responsibility, individual liberties, falls somewhere in oligarchy. They want very little government, but a lot of rights for businesses. Democratic socialism, nationalized industry, minimal private business, centralized planning, transition to communism, workers' rights, and controls. So that's kind of on the edge between state capitalism and communism. Fascism, strong national identity, appeal to tradition, entwining of big business and government to enforce economic and social order, xenophobia, intolerance of indifference. Goes right about there. Communism, working control of the means of production, strong centralized government, quote, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. Well, there should be an end quote there. Socialist economy. So right about there. Nazism, fascism with white nationalism, white supremacism, scapegoating of minorities and immigrants began in Germany before World War II, now a global ideology. Violent repression of those considered enemies. Goes right about there. And now we have anarcho-communism. All property is collectively managed. Mutual aid and gift economy, all for all. Provide for everyone's needs, democratic businesses. Right about there. Anarcho-capitalism, some would say a contradiction in terms. Government only for law enforcement, contract law, and national defense. So bare minimum of government, free markets, no social programs, and the non-aggression principle. Right next to libertarianism. Democratic confederalism. Village neighborhood government has the most control and uses direct democracy, coordinates with other government units, elevation of minority power. Right about there. Monarchism, return to absolute monarch. It's a rule by absolute monarch. Stability, leadership, tradition, mercantilist economy, anti-liberalism. Right there. Antifa. You may have heard of Antifa before. Anti-fascist organizing, generally anti-capitalist, leftist beliefs, anti-racist, forceful confrontation of far-right groups. So that's right on the edge there between communism and direct democracy. The Proud Boys, anti-feminist, white nationalist, Western chauvinist, anti-communist, fascist, and libertarian. Right there. Black Lives Matter, anti-racist, anti-police brutality, feminist, broadly pro-democracy, pro-DEI. Right there. The Manosphere, or Red Pill, traditional gender roles, misogyny, anti-LGBTQIA, anti-feminist, hyper-materialistic culture. Right there. Feminism, equal social and economic status between the sexes, removal of systemic misogyny, freedom of choice, reproduction, and reproductive freedom. Goes right along with progressivism. And that's about the center point. And when I put each of these on the spectrum, it's about where the center, I believe, is. So I consider both the people that believe in the ideology as well as maybe governments that institute the various programs or ideologies, and I kind of try to find a center point between all of everything. That's my calculation. The Republican Party, low taxes, strong military and police, family and religion, free market capitalism, social modesty, traditional gender roles. And that's about the midpoint, I would say, for the American Republican Party. Kind of on that edge between oligarchy and representative democracy. Democratic Party, high taxes for the rich, regulated market capitalism, environmental protection, protection of minorities, social programs, less military and police spending. So kind of in between progressivism and centrism. The Libertarian Party, laissez-faire capitalism, no social programs, individual liberty, property rights, legalized drugs, military non-intervention. Right about there between libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. The Green Party, environmentalism, social justice, money out of politics, eco-socialism, Green New Deal, and universal health care. Put that also right on the edge between democratic socialism and representative democracy. I'm sorry, between socialism and capitalism. The Constitution Party, property rights, Christian-based laws, traditional gender roles, low taxes, anti-immigration, right about in that region. The Alliance Party, centrist, for gun control, green energy, universal basic income. So, of course, they go along with centrism. The Party for Socialism and Liberation, revolution-focused, Marxist-Leninist, slash military spending, green energy, reproductive rights. So right there with communism. The Forward Party, this was a recent party. I think it was the 2020 election cycle. Centrist, universal basic income, electoral reform, humanistic capitalism, and technological innovation. So a pretty centrist party, a little bit of left-leaning stuff on their platform. The Working Families Party, raise the minimum wage, green energy, progressive taxation, healthcare reform, and student debt reform. So these were all parties that have been on the ballot in recent elections. That's how I selected these ones. As the Working Families goes, right about the progressive part of the spectrum. I think this is our final stop here. So now we have governments. United States, elections influenced by money, strong military and police, free market capitalism, multiculturalism, fewer social programs than other rich nations. So the U.S., in my estimation, the center point is right about there on that borderline between representative democracy and oligarchy. Canada, regulated market capitalism, environmental protection, less military spending, moderately robust social programs, and social justice, puts them right about there. Russia, capitalism, moderately robust social programs, government control by the rich, individual liberties. I mean, Putin has been in power since like the early 2000s. So that was part of my estimation for this one. Individual liberties constrained, and military imperialism. So that puts them just a little bit to the right of the US, in my estimation. China, robust social programs, nationalized industry, censorship, state capitalism, universal health care, square in the state capitalism bracket. Cuba, centralized economy, highly robust social programs, state censorship, moderate access to government by the people, and land reform. Puts them right about there. And that is our most leftward country that we'll be considering. United Kingdom, eroding social programs, gun control, multiculturalism, constitutional monarchy, regulated capitalism, just a little bit to the right of Canada. Iran, theocratic dictatorship, economy managed for the elite's benefit, human rights abuses, fundamental culture imposed, and citizens' average politics maybe more liberal than their actual country. Iran was a tough one because I believe that the citizenry itself has much more liberal politics than how the government is run, but they have very little means to change the course of the government. So I put them right about there, just on the edge of monarchy, between monarchy and oligarchy. That was my best estimate for them. The Union, this is the Civil War era of the United States, anti-slavery, ruled by economic elites, free press, but fewer worker protections, poor human rights record. This I based mostly on the period of Reconstruction through the Gilded Age, so right following the Civil War, that this is pretty much how things were. And so they are pretty far right compared to how America is today. I think that's a fair place to put them. And then finally, the Confederate States of America. This is their actual last flag. despite what you may have seen flying from people's trucks. It is not just the stars and bars. That was the just that flag there was the battle flag of Virginia, but the mostly white, and they call it the blood dipped flag, with then the inset of the stars and bars, was the last flag of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War era. Slavery preservation, almost no social or economic mobility, explicitly white supremacist, few human rights. So they go right about there. Definitely not into monarchy, because they had still rejected the monarchical system, but not far from it. And there you have it. This is the end, the actual end, the final end. You have made it all the way to the end of the political spectrum. And with that, I think I'm all done talking for tonight. I appreciate anybody who showed up, and hope that you gained something from it. Yeah. It can be a lot to digest. That's a lot of information to throw at you. So if you want to come back in future broadcasts or future streams and ask more questions about it, I'm always here to do my best to answer. But that is my best estimation of an honest political spectrum. So with that, I will say good night to all of you, and hope to see you on the next stream on Sunday.